Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on the time you are watching this video. Before I proceed to the topic, first let us have a small activity entitled Your Picture Looks Familiar. This is just a simple mechanics, so as you look on the picture, you will try to guess what it is. Did your answers match the pictures? If yes, you are familiar at least the topic that we will be discussing. Let us introduce ourselves first. We are the group 2. Ikaw ang nasa Egypt ko. I am Jemuel Edrien Ortiz, who will be your reporter for today's topic, together with Mr. Joshua Ursolino. We got to learn about the African literature from the previous reporter. Today, brace yourself as we travel to another country and learn about the Egypt. Now, let us have the topic to be discussed under the Egypt. Of course, our main topic is about the Egyptian literature, but we will also tackle the Egypt itself, the Egyptian literature, its historical background, the Egyptian social structure, Queen Cleopatra, mythology composes of gods and goddesses, the types of Egyptian literature, and the summary of Tale of Sinuhe, and to whom should I speak today, which is a poetry. Now, here are our objectives. So at the end of the lesson, you are expected to first, to enumerate and identify the different forms of Egyptian literature. Second is to show appreciation of the writings of Egyptians. And lastly is to read clearly selected poetry and prose. Now let us discuss Egypt itself. So the official name is Arab Republic of Egypt. Its capital is Cairo, and the population is 94.7 million in 2017 according to my research. It has an official language of Arabic. Egypt as a transcontinental. Occupying the northeast corner of Africa, Egypt is bisected by the highly fertile Nile Valley, which separates its arid western desert from the smaller semi-arid eastern desert. Egypt's 1979 peace treaty with Israel brought security, the return of the Sinai, and the large injections of US aid. Its essentially pro-Western military-backed regime is now being challenged by an increasingly influential Islamic fundamental movement. As you can see here, it is the flag of the Egypt. The Egyptian flag consists of 3 horizontal stripes, red, white, and black. In the middle of the white stripe, so-called Saladin's eagle, is placed. It is a national symbol of Egypt and it refers to Arabic identity and independence. Interpretation of the tricolor is as follows. Red refers to bloodshed in numerous wars, white to abolition of the monarchy, and black should commemorate the monarchy and the period of British colonialism.
Good day everyone, I am Joshua Ursolino and I am going to discuss some of my knowledge or researches about Egypt. So let us move on to historical background of ancient Egyptian literature. So ancient origins begin with the introduction to ancient Egypt, dating back to around 3100 BC. Explained that the earliest Egyptian literature was predominantly religious and funerary in nature, often written in hieroglyphics. One of the notable authors from ancient Egyptian literature is Tahotep, who lived during the Old Kingdom period. He is credited the writing the Maxims of Tahotep, a collection of wisdom, literature, and ethical teachings. These maxims offer practical advice on how to live a virtuous and successful life. Tahotep's writings reflect the moral and social values of his time and provide insights into ancient Egyptian culture and society. So the next one is Old Kingdom. Describe the literature of the Old Kingdom, highlighting the significance of the pyramid text and their role in ensuring the pharaohs journeying to the afterlife. Certainly, one of the notable authors from the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt is Ali, who lived during the 13th dynasty, around 18th century BC. Ani is famous for his association with the Book of the Dead, a collection of religious and magical texts that serve as a guide for the deceased in the afterlife. Although Ani didn't write the entire book himself, he is known for commissioning a lavishly illustrated version of it, which provides valuable insights into the religious beliefs and practices of the Old Kingdom period. So the third one is the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom discussed the literary developments during the Middle Kingdom, emphasizing works like The Tale of Sinuhe and the story of the shipwrecked sailor. Explain how these texts provide insights into daily life and adventure. A prominent author from the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt is Amenemhat, who was also a pharaoh of the 12th dynasty. Amenemhat is associated with the instruction of Amenemhat, a significant work of wisdom literature from this period. In these instructions, Amenemhat imparts moral and practical advice to his son and successor, Sansaret. The text emphasizes the importance of maintaining justice, loyalty to the pharaoh, and the need for the good governance. Amenemhat's instructions provide valuable insights into the social and political ideals of the Middle Kingdom era in Egypt. So the fourth one is New Kingdom. New Kingdom explored the flourishing literature of the New Kingdom, emphasizing the love, poetry, wisdom, literature, and the famous Book of the Dead, with its spells and guidance for the afterlife. For the New Kingdom of ancient Egypt, a notable author is unknown. Much of the literature from this period is either anonymous or attributed. So specific scribes or officials rather than individual authors. However, it's important to note that during the New Kingdom, many literary works were created, including the love, poetry, wisdom, literature, and literature texts like the Book of the Dead. While specific authors may not be known, the literary output of the New Kingdom reflects the cultural and intellectual vibrancy of the era. Next is late and Greco-Roman periods. Ito naman is explains how foreign influences affected Egyptian literature during the late and Greco-Roman periods. Mentioned that indigenous literary traditions continued but with adaptations. One notable figure from this period is Ankhihong, an Egyptian priest and author known for his Demotic Chronicle. This chronicle is a historical text written in demonic script, a late form of ancient Egyptian writing that covers a wide range of historical events, including the Persian and Greek occupations of Egypt. Work provides valuable historical insights into this later period of Egyptian literature. And now, I'm going to discuss Egyptian social structure. So, Egyptian social structure has evolved significantly over its long history, but in its ancient form during the time of the pharaohs in the Old Kingdom, it was typically organized as a hierarchical pyramids, much like the shape of the pyramids themselves. Here's a simplified overview. So, first one is slaves. Slavery was present in ancient Egypt, but it was not a pervasive as in some other ancient societies. Slaves were typically prisoners of war or people who had fallen into death. Ang ilan ay kasama sa pagpapagawa ng mga ekstruktura tulad ng mga pyramid, templo at kastilyo. Sila ang mga manggagawa na nagbuhat at nagtayo ng malalaking gusali. So, the next one is peasants. The majority of the population were peasants who worked the land as a farmers and laborers. They provide the agricultural resources that sustain the society. So, ang mga peasants o ang mga magsasaka ay naglaro ng napakahalagang papel sa ekonomiya at lipunan. Unang-unang ang pagsasaka. Ang pangunahing gawain ng mga peasants ay ang pagsasaka. Sila ang nagtatanim, nag-aani at nag-aalaga ng mga halaman at hayop na kinakailangan para sa pagkain ng kanilang pamilya at ng buong kaharian. So, next one is merchants and artisans. The middle class consisted of traders, craftsmen, and skilled laborers. They played a crucial role in the economy and often organized into guilds. Ang mga merchants, sila ang mga tagapag-angkat at nag-aalok ng mga kalakal tulad ng luho, tela, kahoy, metal, at iba pang materyales na kinakailangan sa pang-araw-araw na buhay. So, ang mga artista naman, sila yung alagad ng sining. Sila ang gumagawa ng mga pinta, eskultura, at dekorasyon na ginagamit sa mga templo, palasyo, at iba pang pampublikong gusali. Ang sumunod naman dyan is yung mga scribes. Scribes were highly respected individuals responsible for writing and record keeping. They served in various capacities from government, administration, to temple records. Ang pangunahing tungkulin ng mga scribes ay ang pagsusulat. Sila ang mga espesyalistang gumagamit ng mga hieroglyphics o makabagong pagsusulat ng Egypt upang mag-record ng mga impormasyon tulad ng dokumento, tala-arawan, at iba pang mga halagang kaganapan. Ang sumunod naman dyan is nobility and officials. Directly below the parao were the nobility including high-ranking officials, priests, and military leaders. They held significant administrative and religious roles. Ang mga opisyal sa pamahalaan tulad ng mga biser at ang mga ministro ay nagtataguyod ng kaayusan at pamamahala sa Egypt. Sila ang may tungkuling magpatupad ng batas at regulasyon since sila ang nagpapatupad, sila din ang mismong gumagawa ng mga batas. So, punta naman tayo sa pinakamataas na role sa Egypt, which is yung mga parao. At ang parao at the pinnacle of the social structure was the parao, who held absolute power. The parao was not only the political leader, but also considered a divine figure and the mediator between the gods and people. Ang parao ay pangunahing leader na naghukbo at puwersa ng militar. Siya ang nagpapamahala sa depensa at proteksyon ng kaharian. Tinuturing din siyang Diyos o higit sa lahat ng tao sa Egypt. Sa madaling salita, ang parao ay isang sentro ng kapangyarihan, otoridad, at kultura sa kaharian ng Egypt. So, it is important to note that Egyptian social structure was not entirely rigid and individuals could move between classes under certain circumstances. Moreover, women had some rights including the ability to own property and participate in business transactions, although they generally had fewer legal rights than men. So, I know some of you heard the name Queen Cleopatra, but hindi nyo siya lubusang kilala. So, Cleopatra, referred to as simply as Cleopatra, was one of the most famous and powerful queens in ancient history. She was a member of the Song dynasty which ruled Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. Here are some key points about Queen Cleopatra. In early life, Cleopatra was born in 69 BC or before Christ and became a co-ruler of Egypt with her father and later with her brothers. Alliance with Rome. She was known for her relationships with two Roman leaders, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. These alliances were politically motivated and aimed at securing her positions as the ruler of Egypt. So, si Cleopatra din ay may inaangking kagandahan. At sa tingin ko, isa ito sa mga dahilan kung bakit siya naging queen. Siya ay isang magandang reyna na ginamit ang kanyang kagandahan upang maakit ang mga lider ng iba't ibang bansa. So, ang role naman ni Cleopatra sa Roman politics is she played a significant role in Roman politics during a period of civil wars and power struggles. She had a child with Julius Caesar named Caesarion and was romantically involved with Mark Antony, with whom she had three children. And the Battle of Actium, Cleopatra's relationship with Mark Antony led to conflict with his rival, Octavian. The famous Battle of Actium in 31 BC resulted in the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra's forces. So, following the death of Actium, Cleopatra and Mark Antony died by suicide, 30 BC. Cleopatra's death is traditionally attributed to the bite of an asp, a venomous snake. End of dynasty. Cleopatra's death marked the end of dynasty and the annexation of Egypt into the Roman Empire. Her son Caesarion was executed and Egypt became a Roman province. Meron din siyang multilingual skills. So, Cleopatra was known for her linguistic talents. In addition to Egyptian, she could converse in Greek, Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, and other languages. This skill facilitated her diplomatic and political dealings with leaders from different regions. Ang mga ito ay ilan lamang sa mga rason kung bakit marami ang humahanga kay Queen Cleopatra. Siya ay isang mahalagang bahagi ng kasaysayan at nag-iwan ng malalim na alaala hindi lamang sa Egypt, kundi sa buong mundo. Let us go first to their literature. So, Egyptian literature has a rich history dating back thousands of years. Ancient Egyptian literature includes texts like the Pyramid Text, Coffin Text, and the famous Book of Dead. These texts often dealt with religious and funerary themes in the Middle Kingdom. There were stories like the Tale of Sinuhe and the story of the shipwrecked sailor. The Tale of Sinuhe ay isang sinaunang Egyptian literary composition na isinulat noong mga unang panahon ng Egypt. Naging mahalaga ang The Tale of Sinuhe sa pag-aaral ng kasaysayan ng Egypt dahil nagbibigay ito ng mga ugnayan sa iba't ibang kultura at mga relasyon sa iba't ibang kaharian noong sinaunang panahon. Bukod dito, nagbibigay rin ito ng insight sa mga paniniwala at pagpapahalaga ng mga sinaunang Egyptian. In modern times, Egyptian literature has a continued thrive with notable authors like Naguib Mahfouz, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1988. His works, including the Cairo Trilogy, are renowned internationally. Egyptian literature reflects the country's rich cultural heritage and its enduring impact on the literary world. So, certainly, Egyptian literature is a vast and diverse field with various periods and genres. Here are some key aspects and periods of Egyptian literature. First one is hieroglyphics and hieratic script. Ancient Egyptian literature was often recorded using hieroglyphics on stone monuments and papyrus, or in hieratic script, a cursive form of hieroglyphics which was used for administrative and literary texts. The next one is religious text. A significant portion of ancient Egyptian literature is devoted to religious and funerary texts. The Book of the Dead, or the Book of the Going Forth by Day, is a famous example providing guidance for the afterlife. The third one is wisdom literature. Egyptian sage and scholars wrote wisdom literature, offering moral and practical advice. The instructions or teachings of various figures like Ptahhotep and Amenhotep are notable examples. The next one is love poetry. Some love poetry from ancient Egypt has survived, expressing themes of romantic love and desire. The love songs of Amarna is a collection of such poetry. So the next one is contemporary literature. Egyptian literature continues to flourish with contemporary authors like Ala al-Haswani, who gained international acclaim for his works like the Yacubian Building, addressing social and political issues in modern Egypt. So, Egyptian literature is a testament to the rich cultural history and literary legacy of Egypt, spanning ancient hieroglyphics to modern Arabic literature, reflecting the country's evolving society and values over the millennia.
Thank you, Mr. Joshua Ursolino. Now let us discuss mythology, which comprises the gods and goddesses. Egypt had one of the largest and most complex pantheons of gods of any civilization in the ancient world. Over the course of Egyptian history, hundreds of gods and goddesses were worshipped, and here are few of the most important deities to know. We have first Osiris, one of Egypt's most important deities and was god of the underworld. He also symbolized death, resurrection, and the cycle of Nile floods that Egypt relied on for agricultural fertility. And according to the myth, Osiris was a king of Egypt who was murdered and dismembered by his brother Seth. His wife Isis reassembled his body and resurrected him, allowing them to conceive a son, the god Horus. He was represented as a mummified king, wearing wrappings that left only the green skin of his hands and face exposed. Second one, we have Isis. Over time, she grew in importance, eventually becoming the most important goddess in the pantheon. As the devoted wife who resurrected Osiris after his murder and raised their son Horus, Isis embodied the traditional Egyptian virtues of a wife and a mother. As the wife of the god of the underworld, Isis was also one of the main deities concerned with rites for the dead, and along with her sister Nephthys, Isis acted as a divine mourner, and her maternal care was often depicted as extending to the dead in the underworld. She was one of the last of the ancient Egyptian gods to still be worshipped. In the Greco-Roman period, she was identified with the Greek goddess Aphrodite, and her cult spread as far west as Great Britain and as far east as Afghanistan. It is believed that depictions of Isis was the infant Horus influenced Christian imagery of Mary with the infant Jesus. As you can see in the slide, Horus, depicted as a falcon or as a man with a falcon's head. Horus was a sky god associated with war and hunting. He was also the embodiment of the divine kingship, and in some eras, the reigning king was considered to be a manifestation of Horus. According to the Osiris myth, Horus was the son of Isis and Osiris, magically conceived after the murder of Osiris by his brother Seth. Horus was raised to avenge his father's murder. One tradition holds that Horus lost his left eye fighting with Seth, but his eye was magically healed by the god Thoth. Because the right and left eyes of Horus were associated respectively with the sun and the moon, the loss and restoration of Horus' left eye gave a mythical explanation for the phases of the moon. Next, we have Set. Set was the god of chaos, violence, deserts, and storms. In the Osiris myth, he is the murderer of Osiris. Set's appearance possesses a problem for Egyptologists. He is often depicted as an animal or as a human with the head of an animal, but they cannot figure out what animal he's supposed to be. He usually has a long snout and long ears are squared at the tips. In his fully animal form, he has a thin dog-like body and a straight tail with a tuft on the end. Many scholars now believe that no such animal ever existed and that the Set animal is some sort of mythical composite. Next, we have Nephthys. She is the goddess of the dead, sister and wife of Set. Next is Pitha. Pitha was the head of a triad of gods worship at Memphis. The other two members of the triad were Pitha's wife, the lion-headed goddess Sekhmet, and the god Nefertem, who may have been the couple's son. Pitha's original association seems to have been with craftsmen and builders. In ancient Egypt, he is the creator of the universe, god of artisans. He became one of the chief deities of Egypt and was identified by the Greeks with Hephaestus. Scholars have suggested that the Greek word Aegyptus, the source of the name Egypt, may have started as a corruption of Kipita, the name of one of the Pita's shrine. Next is Re or Ra, one of the several deities associated with the sun. The god Re or Ra was usually represented with a human body and the head of a hawk. It was believed that he sailed across the sky in a boat each day and then made a passage through the underworld each night, during which he would have to defeat the snake god Apophis in order to rise again. Next is Hathor. The goddess Hathor was usually depicted as a cow, as a woman with the head of a cow, or as a woman with cow's ears. Hathor embodied motherhood and fertility. It was believed that she protected women in childbirth. She also had an important funerary aspect, being known as the Lady of the West. Tombs were generally built on the west bank of the Nile, and in some traditions, she would welcome the setting sun every night, leaving people hope to be welcomed into the afterlife in the same way. Next is Anubis. Anubis was concerned with the funerary practices and the care of the dead. He was usually represented as a jackal or as a man with the head of a jackal. The association of jackals with death and funerals likely arose because of Egyptians would have observed jackals scavenging around cemeteries. In the Old Kingdom, before Osiris rose to prominence as the lord of the underworld, Anubis was considered the principal god of the dead, and according to the Osiris myth, Anubis embalmed and wrapped the body of the murdered king, becoming the patron god for the embalmers. Followed by Thoth. Thoth is the god of writing and wisdom. Could be depicted in the form of a baboon or a sacred ibis or a man with the head of an ibis. He was believed to have invented a language and the hieroglyphic script and to serve as a scribe and advisor for the gods. As the god of wisdom, Thoth was said to possess knowledge of magic and secrets unavailable to the other gods. In underworld scenes showing the judgment undergone by the deceased after their deaths, Thoth is depicted as weighing the hearts of the deceased and reporting the verdict to Osiris, the god of the dead. Next, we have Bastet. In her earliest forms, the cat goddess Bastet was represented as a woman with the head of a lion or a wild cat. She took the less ferocious form of a domestic cat in the first millennium before Common Era. In later periods, she was often represented as a regal-looking seated cat, sometimes wearing rings in her ears or nose. In the Ptolemaic period, she came to be associated with the Greek goddess Artemis, the divine hunter of the goddess of the moon. Ammon. Before rising to national importance in the New Kingdom, the god Ammon was worshipped locally in the southern city of Thebes. Ammon was a god of the air, and the name probably means the hidden one. He was usually represented as a man wearing a crown with two vertical plumes. His animal symbols were the ram and the goose. Next, we have Ma'at. She is the goddess of law, justice, and truth, daughter of Re or Ra, often represented as a woman with a feather on her head. Next, we have Gev, the god of the earth, the physical support of the world. Geb constituted, along with Nut, his sister. Geb was usually portrayed as a man without any distinguishing characteristics, but at times he was represented with his head surmounted by a goose, the hieroglyph of his name. Next, we have Nut. As you can see in the picture, she is the goddess of the sky, the vault of the heavens, consort of Geb, often depicted as a man with arc over the earth god Geb. As the goddess of the sky, Nut swallowed the sun in the evening and gave birth to it again in the morning. As you can see, the arc, she is Nut, and underneath is the god Geb. Let us now discuss types of Egyptian literature. Most of the Egyptian writings fall into one of the 5 types: wisdom literature, religious literature, tales, love lyrics, pessimistic literature. First, let us discuss religious literature. Religious literature predominates in Egypt. This is always the case when the priests are the only persons who can write and make records, and it is rare that any secular literature survives from an early period. In Egypt, the earliest body of text that can be called literature is entirely religious and comprises series of hymns and spells sculptured on the walls of the burial chambers in the pyramids of the 5 kings of the 6th dynasty. These are now known as the pyramid texts. They have clearly been copied and recopied so many times that often the language is too corrupt to be comprehensible. It is, however, possible to translate the greater part of the inscription, though many of the allusions are baffling. The pyramid texts consist of hymns and spells for the benefit of the dead, and as they are the earliest literary liturgy and exposition of religion in the world, they throw a great light on the primitive beliefs and official creeds. The knowledge of them was handed down undoubtedly by word of mouth till the time of the 12th dynasty, when many of the texts appear on the printed and sculptured coffins of that period. These we now call the coffin texts. So much of Egyptian literature perished under the rule of the Hyksos, that it is not surprising to find no survival of the text until the 18th dynasty. Then a few of the early spells occurs in that interesting compilation to which the misleading title of Book of the Dead was given by early Egyptologists. The Book of the Dead is a series of chapters or literary divisions written on papyrus and often illustrated with miniature paintings found in graves. The chapters are not necessarily connected with one another, or they are not consecutive, and there is no reason why they should be regarded as part of a book. For convenience sake, the name of Book of the Dead is retained, and also the numbering and the so-called chapters. The book was intended for the exercise of magic for private individuals in the life hereafter. This is what the Old Kingdom had hoped to derive from carving the pyramid texts in their burial monuments. Another important religious work is the Hymns to the Sun God, prepared by Amenhotep IV, who later called himself Akhenaton because he believed he was the manifestation of the great Egyptian ruler who tried to make his people believe in one God, the sun god Ra or Re, the powerful and the king creator. A characteristic piece of devotional literature is the Hymn to Osiris, which begins as a hymn and ends as a prayer. Besides hymns and spells for the dead, there is another type of religious literature also connected with the dead. And these are the good wishes of the relatives, which when they recited in the correct chant and with the correct gestures, were believed to secure the happiness of the dead man. A typical example of this is the one from the tomb of the scribe Amon-Nehat, who lived in the reign of Thutmose III. Next is the tales. As Egyptian literature is the earliest in the world, it is interesting to know how certain forms arose. There are many stories of the Middle Kingdom which almost amount to novels, but they are so condensed as to be bald and dull in translation. This appears to have been due to their being merely notes for the guidance of a professional storyteller who, like the bands of our early history, traveled about the country and made his living by narrating interesting and amusing stories to the illiterate audience. For such a man, especially for a beginner, notes would be useful if not essential. The story could be lengthened or abridged at will. Conversation could be interpolated when necessary and the tale told with appropriate gestures. And during the Middle Kingdom, the Egyptian short stories were in bloom. Among them, the tale of Sinuhe is the most famous. Other short stories are the story of the Doomed Prince, Misadventures of Wen Amon, and Amon, and others. Another stories is the story of King Khufu and the Magicians, which tells a lively story of a miraculous happening at the court of the monarch as a prelude to the no less miraculous birth of triplets to the priestess destined by the prophecy to become future kings. The story is probably political propaganda, but it also contains the essential ingredients of a fairy tale. Next, we also have the tale of two brothers. Is another story which is similar to biblical story of Joseph and his brother. The story of the shipwrecked sailor is another fine example which relates how a sailor was thrown on a desert island where he conversed with a gigantic serpent. The story of the eloquent peasants tells the bad and the tedious complaints of a peasant who had been robbed of his merchandise. Next, we also have the wisdom literature. The so-called maxims and instructions belong to the genre of didactic, or we called wisdom literature, a popular form of expression throughout ancient Egypt. A device is put into the mouth of an old man admonishing a younger man of the rules of good behavior, or a king who gives advice on wise rule. The teaching of Amenemopet and others may be learned by heart as part of young man's education. These are widely quoted in conversation and contain many parallels of Hebrew literature. Next, we have the pessimistic literature. One of the many forms of literature that blossomed during the Middle Kingdom is the pessimistic literature. An interesting specimen of this type is the dialogue of a disappointed man with his soul. Dialogue of a pessimist with his soul. The admonitions of an Egypt sage describe a topsy-turvy world in which every is awry, the poor usurping the land and the place of the rich and the foreigners, invading the land, no respect and no virtue anywhere, yet a rhythmer is at hand. This is poor stuff from the literary points of view, but it is interesting early evidence of the cyclic reoccurrence of revolutionary reversals of fortunes. We have another type of Egyptian literature, which is love songs. The love poems of ancient Egypt are in many ways like those of any other countries and therefore run easily into English verse. Thus, the lover likens the maiden to all the flowers in the garden. Then there is the lover who falls ill with the longing to see his beloved. Bridal songs were sung as they are still in the village of Egypt, the theme always being the surpassing beauty of the bride, and one of the most charming are the bridal songs of the Princess Motardist. It has a refrain which may have been the theme of many poets in all countries, but the Egyptian poem is perhaps the earliest of its kind. So you might be questioning yourself, how did the Egyptian literature was preserved, or how did the discovery of the Egyptian literature? It has survived largely in the form of priestly texts on papyrus, which is a form of writing materials taken from the reed which grew in the Nile, or school copies written on tablets, and astraka, which is a pieces of broken pottery of flakes and limestones. Some 70 works have been identified, but many of them are fragmentary and represent only a fraction of the literary achievement of ancient Egyptians, most of which is lost. The text may be classified as historical and mythology-based, popular romances, secular and religious forms, model letters, and collection of moral precepts or instructions. There were three forms also of Egyptian writings: the hieroglyphics, which is the oldest form, which use line drawings representing characters that depict objects and ideas. Next is the hieratic symbol, which is simpler and more conventionalized in form than hieroglyphics. It is used by priests, and the lastly is the demotic symbols. It used in commercial documents at about the 17th century before Christ. Greek was used in Egyptian literature since the conquest of the Alexander the Great. Let us proceed to an example of poetry in Egyptian literature. Let us read this poem, as this poem shows that since time immemorial, problems in human relations have existed. And what are these problems? This is entitled "To Whom Should I Speak Today" by Thomas Eric Pete. So let us now read.
To whom should I speak today? To Eric Pete. To whom should I speak today? Brothers are evil, the friends of today love not. To whom should I speak today? Hearts are covetous, every man plundereth the goods of his fellow. To whom should I speak today? The peaceful man is in evil case, good is cast aside everywhere. To whom should I speak today? Yesterday is forgotten, men do not as they were done by nowadays. To whom should I speak today? The righteous are no more, the land is given over to evildoers. To whom should I speak today? There is lack of confidants, men have recourse to a stranger to tell their troubles. To whom should I speak today? I am laden with misery, and am without a comforter.
So thank you for reading the poem itself. It is a poem by Thomas Eric Pete, which is an Egyptian poet which shows distrust of fellow men. It voices the idea that problems in human relations were as acute then as they are now. In terms of structure, the poem's tones is misery, discomforts, and filled with heartaches. The poem tells about someone who has been experiencing such sorrow, yet he does not know how, or does not know to whom should he speak, or to whom should throw up all the sentiments, to whom should he confine himself. In addition, he expresses that most of the people are not to be trusted with, and that everyone cannot be reliable, and we cannot hold or lean on to anybody in this time, and a righteous fellow does not exist anymore. And as he said, what lives in their land are evildoers. Now let us read another literature from Egypt. This is entitled The Tale of Sinuhe, and I have prepared the summary of the tale so you can join reading or listen carefully to understand the story.
Tale of Sinew. Sinew, the hero of romance, was a near relative of the wife of King Amenemhet I. For some unexplained reasons he took fright when he heard of the death of King Amenemhet I and fled from Egypt. When crossing the desert of Sinai he nearly died of thirst, but a tribal chief was so pleased with him that before long Sinew found himself married to the chief's eldest daughter, and in possession of a fine country and in the headship of a tribe. He grew old and was apparently lonely, for all his children were grown up. A great longing came over him to return once more to his native land. He therefore wrote a humble petition to the pharaoh Sesitrist begging for permission to return home. The pharaoh replied in gracious term, and when the letter arrived, Sinew was wildly excited. The letter reached me as I stood in the midst of my tribe. I touched the dust, and I strewed it in my hair. I strode about the camp rejoicing and saying, how can such a thing be done to a servant whose heart led him to stray to barbarous lands? Verily, good indeed is the benevolent one who had delivered me from death, who has permitted him to end my life in the residence. He at once settled all his affairs and travelled to Egypt. On his arrival at the residence, he is received with honor, 10 men behind and 10 men in front of me to conduct me to the palace, and the royal children stood at the gate to receive me. The interview with the pharaoh being very satisfactory, Sinew is given a house, such as might have belonged to a counselor, and meals are brought continually to him by royal children. There was made for me a pyramid of stone among the pyramids. The chief architect undertook the building of it. The chief draftsman designed it. The chief sculptor carved it, and the chief builders of the cemetery busied themselves with it. Chantry priests were given to me, and there was made for me a mortuary estate with the fields near the tomb, as is done for a chief counsellor. It was His Majesty who had all this done. Sinew told the account of his life in a short poem in which he contrasts the misery of his life at the beginning and pleasantness at its close. Once a fugitive fled in his terror. Now I am known in the palace of Pharaoh. Once a weary one fainted in hunger, now I have bread to give to my neighbor. Once a man fled from Egypt all naked, now I am clothed in white linen garments. Once a man ran to take his own message, now I have slaves and servants in plenty. Fair is my house and wide is my dwelling, for I am known in the palace of Pharaoh.
The story of Sinuhe was the finest and best known because of the romantic and high adventures of a man who loyally served his king. This story is a precursor of the modern novel, especially the novel of adventure, because this story was written by an author who has great imaginative and poetic skill in his work of arts. The story is of a real person, but the author romanticized his story, which means that he has put some fascinating dialogues like those in wars, fighting with others, and shouting. The setting is good for romance and combat scenes. Adventure is recounted from the start to finish, and personalities portrayed with consummate skill. We see Sinuhe alternately panic-stricken, a self-confident fighter, a humble suppliant, and then again overcome by awe in the presence of the king of Egypt. Humor and pathos are there also in this story. If you like to read more about the topic for today's video, I'll cite here the references used as the information. So thank you for watching. We hope you learned something from us.